and it's the same with art. If you go into art, not that you're going to look at art and go kill people, but he was possessed by the White Album, so maybe that, I don't know. Anyway, but the interaction with art, if you come into it with the wrong mindset, you're never going to see through the artist's eyes or look at the perspective that they're trying to show you as a way of making you go, oh, this is another way to look at the world. And I can look at the world that way if I choose to. Just like the way that I'm looking at the world now is the way that I'm choosing to look at the world. It's the worldview that I have chosen to establish at this moment in time. And that may change, and that may have been very much solidified for many, many years for some people. But the idea that, hey, there might be something else, another way to look at the world. It's not, here's the right way to look at the world.
Right.
It's just know that there might be others, and don't be so attached to the one that you have, because that's only a byproduct of choices, of information that you've received, things that you've decided to believe or discount, and then how, ultimately you think about the world and cosmology, And
Absolutely,
if you're not thinking about who are we, why are we here, where do we come from, what are we doing? If you don't take those questions with you, generally, you come across a piece of art without the ability to see that this is what it's trying. Why is this perspective important? Why is it's not? Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to episode 2 of the Make Art Not Friends podcast. For this episode, I'm joined once again by Boris. My name is Andy, and we're going to discuss not only what art is, but in this episode, why it is important, and many other things. We get into quite a range of things, so we hope you enjoy. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week for episode number 3. Take care.
I don't know. I was just thinking today, I was having a little rumination, if you will, about, what my friend who's into astrology. I just remembered a conversation that we were talking about. She's always talking about like Neptune and how if you're an artist or if you create something or you get any kind of inspiration, that's like an energy that really brings a lot of. That's an energy that's traditionally associated with that. And she was just saying how, it all depends. Like there's no good or bad in astrology. It's just like in nature, there's no real like good. It's not an inherent thing, and I'm not to say nothing of in natural law. Obviously there's morally, you know what I'm saying. I don't need the disclaimer, but yeah. So it's just interesting because I feel like, in a way, it's not very good for things to be sort of peachy in the world for an artist, because it's sort of like, it's like, well, what am I really doing? You know what I mean? Kind of back to episode 1 where it's like, all right, well, everyone's just sort of comfortable and complacent. Like, I guess I'll pump out like 4,000 cat prints a month, like it's just, I feel like we might as well just run with the cat prints trope, because it kind of, we've established a tradition of that. Here on
I think everybody knows exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have to spend a long time explaining it, but yeah. So I guess in a way, I always used to think about that, because people are like, well, an artist should have something to say, like, you need a bold statement. And I always was kind of like, what the fuck is my bold statement? Like, I'm still getting my bearings, and like I felt like the mass consciousness had not received like a jarring, knuckle sandwich to the teeth yet to really be open to receiving a bold message, very much, because there's, with all the causes and shit that people supported, a lot of it was just so tokeny. You know what I'm getting at? Like, and so I don't know. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah. It made me think this is one of the common misconceptions I think that people have about art. And I think someone saying that artists should have bold things to say is a direct result of this misconception, which is
Hmm.
art should give me something with which to live my life. Like, I don't need to bring anything to the art. The art will just deliver the solution to me. That's not what art's about.
Mm.
Art is there to serve as a jumping off point for exploration so you can start finding your own answers. The answers don't come through art. Art is just a little, porthole looking through the keyhole at what answers might be out there.
Right. Just
Um,
like the answers don't come through any external thing, those are all tools. So that's how I'm interpreting what you're
yeah,
saying. Art
yeah,
is like a
exactly.
tool. Just like psychedelics. It's like you can
Yeah,
take it, and if you're, just you get what I'm saying. I don't have to
yeah,
explain.
yeah. And, yeah, if you take psychedelics and you're Charlie Manson, I'm not saying that that's, the cause and the official story is true or whatever, but,
Right.
then you kill some people.
Right.
That's in people's minds. I think that equation is set up, and it's the same with art. If you go into art, not that you're going to look at art and go kill people, but he was
Hopefully
possessed
not.
by the White Album, so maybe that, I don't know. Anyway, um, but the interaction with art, if you come into it with the wrong mindset, you're never going to see through the artist's eyes or look at the perspective that they're trying to show you as a way of making you go, oh, this is another way to look at the world. And I can look at the world that way if I choose to. Just like the way that I'm looking at the world now is the way that I'm choosing to look at the world. It's the worldview that I have chosen to establish at this moment in time. And that may change, and that may have been very much solidified for many, many years for some people. But the idea that, hey, there might be something else, another way to look at the world, it's not here's the right way to look at the world.
Right.
It's just know that there might be others and don't be so attached to the one that you have, because that's only a byproduct of choices, of information that you've received, things that you've decided to believe or discount. Um, and then how, ultimately you think about the world and cosmology, and
Absolutely.
if you're
Yeah.
not thinking about who are we, why are we here, where do we come from, what are we doing, if you don't take those questions with you, generally, you come across a piece of art without the ability to see
Unpack
that this is
anything.
what it's trying. Why is this perspective important? Why? And so it's not a bold statement the artist is making. In fact, I think it should be subtle. The subtler, the better sometimes.
Right.
It's subtly just saying, look, the world might appear this way to some people. And
That's
one of
yeah.
the biggest problems I have with people talking about uh, uh, written word storytelling, television
Mhm.
shows, whatever it is a lot of times you'll look at, I'll take Breaking Bad as a pretty popular example.
Mhm.
They'll look at this person and go, that person didn't learn anything. That person continued to make bad choices. Look at how all these choices came back to plague their life. Anytime he stepped outside of morality, Walter White would end up suffering somehow,
Mhm.
ultimately to the point where he died. Spoiler alert for those people that haven't watched. Um, but he didn't learn anything. That drives me crazy. Oh, he was a bad guy. He didn't learn anything. He's not supposed to learn anything. He's a
Right.
fictional character.
Right.
You're supposed to learn something by witnessing him, by witnessing the worldview that he has and the worldview of the people around him and the results of his actions.
Right.
Not as some person that's out there with this actual worldview. This is a vehicle.
Mhm.
This is a tool in order to communicate what might be this type of person's worldview.
It's really interesting just listening to you describe all of that. That might be one of the most holistic descriptions of actually what psychedelics do is this. I don't want, it's not deconditioning, it's more like a blank slate card that's like, hey, I'm going to show you this wild, beatific vision. And in the back of your mind, you might have memories of what you, before that you went into this psychedelic experience, what you remember, standard, everyday sort of humdrum reality being like. And that, and this really feeds into like the whole stoned ape theory in my mind. It's like, that's what that sort of like, I guess you could call it the bliss experience or the awakening experience, or maybe like a little lowercase e, you know what I'm saying, like enlightenment experience, where you to me the essence of that is holding these two things in juxtaposition, like two, equally like, I don't want to say optional, but two equally valid, let's say, views on reality, perceptions of, perceptual lenses, and realizing in the juxtaposition of those two that, oh, I have a choice, and that I think is really um, the most kind of uncorrupted version of the whole, manifest your own reality thing, is just that understanding that, oh, what version of how I see the world that I choose to hold, that is what, everything sort of flows through that little pinhole or keyhole, as you said. So I think this little sort of tangent that we're on, it really applies to so many things. It applies to psychedelics, it applies to art, it applies to, uh, plant medicines and substances and altered states. And it's like, if you, and that's why I think that it's so important to be, I don't want to say erudite, but like to have a context, like with literature, like, really helps having read a lot of other literature, like knowing, having good command of English language, just being at a certain level. Same with art. Like, so this is the reason that I went on that sort of little roundabout, is I wanted to make this statement about, this applies to literature too. The fact that I think because people have fallen into this very utilitarian, like literalism, a lot of which stems from how they're taught to interact with science and religion and scripture, of like, it's like boom, and medicine, which is sort of like a, a very large wart that's grown on the butt cheek of science, like at this point, it's just like, it's all these things. It's like, it's just accept this, it's like, it's exactly what's being shown to you and nothing else. There's no room for critical thinking. We want you to be educated, by which we mean we want you to be educated enough to police the gates of our like intellectual technocracy, or medical, apartheid, whatever it is. And it's just really interesting, because this connects to what I was talking about last time too. It's like, how does one make art? How does one stay true to oneself and what one is really driven to create, in a world where it feels like the bar is just like someone unscrewed the bar and it's just in free fall, and people, to the point where I think a lot of people literally don't know the difference between art and marketing and corporate art. Like you get that fluoride stare moment, or I have, where they're like, wow, your stuff is really good. Like, have you ever thought about designing corporate logos? And I'm like, yeah, I've thought about it. I mean, that's a thing I could do. You know what I mean? It's like they don't, and maybe, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever thought about going corporate? Like
yeah,
that's like, you don't understand, if you're saying that, I'm not saying that you're wrong, or that's, cause for alarm if you should have to happen to have that perspective, but I just don't think you understand, because there are some people who don't have a problem. And I'm not saying doing corporate art is necessarily inherently wrong in some
right.
regard. I think the bigger underlying concern is, lack of critical thought that went
Hmm.
into arriving at that decision. But nonetheless, um, the The idea that the artist could really, yeah, and you talk about bold statements, and that's essentially the artist is saying, what statement do you want me to make?
Right.
And so if you do believe that artists should be making bold statements, do you believe that they should be making their own bold statements, or the
Right.
bold statements given to them by somebody else?
Right.
And that's an interesting conversation that certainly I think, you could look back at the Medicis and have that same question about, the artists that they supported. And that's an interesting question. But
And how much freedom does an artist in that position have? And that is a really interesting thing to think about, because then it's like, whoa, all this Renaissance art that we hold in such high regard, was that sort of also done essentially at gunpoint, in large part? And I think it's definitely depends on how you look at it.
there's a lot of stick and carrot. I don't know about gunpoint necessarily. I think the artist was happy to be in the patronage and less concerned with the wider world implications, being that,
Mm-hmm.
they were lucky just to be picked out of,
Right.
the various tradesmen
Yeah,
that were
yeah.
vying for this kind of patronage. But I don't know. That's not really, a little tangential, but yeah, the whole idea of the bar being so low that you can't even stand to look at it. That's certainly a major. We're at that point. I mean, we're definitely at that point. The bar is in free fall.
Yeah, you look at it and then you're like, okay, I think I have a some kind of understanding of the level of dog shit I need to make in order to be able to market it. And then you turn to your paintbrush or notebook and you write a few lines and you look back and you're like, oh man, no, it's gotten lower just in the time I spent, creating that little snippet. So now I have to go into that zone.
Yeah. And that's part of the, it's part of the, everything's meant to channel you down into watching more pieces of less consequential
Right.
media, whatever.
That feeds in so well to. I actually made a couple pretty cool notes of stuff I wanted to talk about, and at least a few of them I think you'd really get a kick out of. I don't want to interrupt you though.
No, please.
So this can, well, if you feel called, you can edit this part out. I'll just list what the points are because I do want to coordinate a little bit, now that I'm like, this is a podcast.
Cool.
So one thing, well, no, this fits in. I'll kind of plug them in. Maybe I think that'll work.
Yeah.
So this just came to me because last time, as I was, kind of going back over, last week's episode, I was listening to the part about, just what we were talking about, basically, the lowering of the bar. And also, I think, film came up a little bit. And I was just thinking, especially springboarding off of what we were saying just now, what would be the modern day equivalent of these old masters, if you will, who, in the patronage of like the Medicis and these incredibly the wealthy sort of super families at the time, the elite of the time, what would be the equivalent? What form of art and who's making it? And I thought about it, and the answer came to me really quickly, actually. It's these Marvel movies. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And in fact, they've replaced the whole mythology of this religious iconography of you should strive to be like this and you should strive to be like Saint so and so, and the virgin nun or saint so and so, you should be chaste, or you should be like this like celibate monk who's also whatever, or like Saint Francis, and it's this mythology, it's and the icons and this. And so I just was thinking about that. I think that's fascinating because, like, I wrote about this just on my own. I was writing about how, oh man, actually, I think, would you mind if I read the portion that that I'm talking about, it fits
No,
in
go
like
for it,
perfectly.
please.
Um,
Yeah, I'm just really quick on the marble while you're looking that up.
mhm.
I think it's interesting to note that it's gone from a kind of coherent and traditional pantheon, whether it's the Christian pantheon, Trinity, whether it's the pantheon or atheon or actually bitheon, because Muslims believe that there's Allah and there's the Quran, and they're both eternal and immortal, and so that's actually a two God system. The Quran and Allah are the two gods.
The Quran is a god?
Essentially, it's as much God as God.
Wow.
But yeah, there's lines in the Quran that talk about the Quran being, as long as God has existed, Quran has existed.
Man, I mean, I
Which
don't.
makes, yeah, and then you look at the Christian, whether it's one God, it's three gods, it's one, but there's a lot of different, and that the whole schism of the Arians and Arius took place because he thought that Jesus was kind of lesser, but then the
Hmm.
Western was like, no, no, they're all equal, but they're all different aspects of God, who's kind of God, but then Jesus is kind of another aspect of Godness. It's confusing,
I
but
feel like, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
totally tangential. Uh, but so the replacement of one pantheon with another,
Hmm.
even going back to replacing this kind of coherent pantheon of the Greeks or the Roman gods, the pagan gods, Zeus and those folks, replacing that with this new kind of coherent cosmology of Christianity, or new coherent cosmology of Islam or whatever. Um,
Really barely
this is
modified in the case of
Yeah,
Christianity from the
yeah,
pagan pantheon.
yeah. I mean, and they both have the same origin stories, which is the angel Gabriel, which I always find weird.
Well, and
Um,
Jesus, the word Jesus is literally like because Yah because the J didn't exist back in that time at all. J is a completely new addition to the English language, actually rather recent. And so it was Yeshua, so it was Yah and then Zeus,
yeah,
meaning Hail Zeus. So
yeah,
Jesus's name is literally Hail Zeus if you take it back. So I just thought that was fascinating. Just want to
yeah.
plug that in.
And that one was a very common name at the time and
Hmm.
place. Um, so yeah, but so they're replacing whatever this pantheon is with the new pantheon, right?
Hmm.
This new pantheon is completely um, there's parts of Celtic, there's parts of the American patriot myth, the American origin story myth of
Right.
Captain
Yeah.
America.
Yeah.
There's Titans of industry, all these different
The
disparate things.
Norse. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Norse. And so it's this incoherent pantheon, which I find interesting as well, because it's all these random bits and pieces. However, what's interesting is it's not that much different at the level that um, the parallels to what is the organization that's putting all this out there trying to do? What is the worldview they're trying to get people to adopt?
Right.
And so they're trying to say, obviously we're not with the God, Jesus and God thing anymore.
No.
But we'll still give you some gods. So here you can have Odin and Loki and whoever from that, because we all know that's a bunch of hooey. And so those are just fun gods
Right.
you can
We
have, but they're
fully
still gods.
fictionalized
Yeah,
everything. Like
they're
it's,
still gods. So with that, that's kind of a little slip. We still gotta. And it also says this is actually a pantheon. This is a universe of super, gods, basically.
can I,
You've got the empowered woman contingent. You've
right.
got the, good businessman. The Bill Gates Iron Man kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Tony Stark is a cool
Uh-huh.
Bill Gates
All right.
and a good,
Or Elon
upstanding.
Musk. Elon
Yeah,
Musk.
yeah. And so people go, oh, Elon Musk can't be that bad. He's just like Iron Man.
Right.
Oh, Hillary Clinton can't be that, but she's basically Wonder Woman, or Michelle Obama, or whoever. It's just, and so that's the idea, is just
Michelle
to build
Obama is He-Man.
the
She's the Hulk.
Hulk, yeah. But whoever it is, it's just you plug that person into that role, get everybody seeing the world kind of through that lens, and you reshape the whole pantheon that people carry around in their minds as to what they're worshiping. And it's gone on, Hollywood's been doing it for a long time. Now we're
Oh,
seeing the
yeah.
shift into the Marvel universe, which is well brought up, just this whole over the top it was one thing when you had like superhero swashbuckling pirates in the 40s and stuff. Like, oh, that's exciting. I will never do that. But it's a whole nother thing when they got flying shit and they can be invisible and like you could train to be a really good sword fighter. You can't train yourself how to fly. Like it's just
Well, I think first of all, I'm really excited because what I have in front of me connects to this like a fucking USB drive into a USB slot. And I saw Mark's presentation, when him and Derek came through town just over the weekend, and it was crazy because I mean, I realized I'm one of the people channeling the same shit that he's screaming about. So that just gave me so much like just joy in my soul. I was like, oh my God, I don't know. It really kind of, he's good at that too. He's good at like, waking you up with a ice cold water on your face, type of feeling, or scalding hot water, depending
remember
on
that this is war, right? Okay. Yeah, I'm
yeah.
awake. Yeah, Mark.
Right. Well, I just really quickly wanted to say what you were saying is that I think what they're trying to sell people on with this Marvel shit, and especially when you think about Iron Man and like the whole Avengers thing, there's this very mechanized, and Transformers, there's this very mechanized transhumanist element to it that's like, oh, don't you want to transcend your fat, bloated, acne riddled, like, ginger cucked body and like be Iron Man?
And that's exactly it. You can't train yourself to fly, but if you become one with the machine, you can have more superpowers. Yeah, exactly.
If you let us, pump you full of black goo through any number of, totally voluntary procedures, that certainly can't ever go badly, and we'll throw in some like rhino DNA while we're at it or whatever, but it's that very, and this is, anyway, I'm going to read what I was going to say in a minute, but I think it's really interesting before we get swept away into wherever I'm going to sweep us away to in a moment, to say that for whatever else we can say about the Bible gives a pretty fucking clear warning about all of this shit. It's like, so like in the days of Noah thing, like that's exactly where we are. It's like, yeah, so there's these people, or there's these motherfuckers who always try the same thing, and like we just, we can trap them, but we can't get rid of them. They always show up and they always have the same game. They try to get you to worship them. There's like a bunch of them. They all have these cool names. And they promise you all these things, and they're talking about how great they're making the world and how free it is. Meanwhile, you have like just brutal rape and child cannibalism and temple prostitution, and like all this shit. But all the promises keep coming like harder and faster, and they keep sort of like feeding the most dismal elements within society. I don't know, I just feel like we're there. And it even talks about, like Noah was a man that was perfect in his generations, aka like he was genetically untainted. So, and I think just the final word about scripture, unless it says something about that in here, which I don't know, probably does. This is a fucking terror. You're going to love this. Is that, people today, I feel like no matter how accomplished of a professor of classics or whatever you are, like I don't think anyone today is equipped to deal with literature written in the style of like the biblical authors, because they just were on it. Like they were on another level. The things people were familiar with back then.
There's a few.
Well, I'd love to talk to them.
Very, very few and far between. John Hamer's the one that immediately springs to mind. He's in Toronto.
Okay.
And
I love that.
Yeah. He's got a phenomenal body of work, and he's a pastor. I don't know what denomination or what, I think he was raised Mormon, but he doesn't come across as Mormon-y at all. But he just wants to know, like, what is the Bible? What is it all? Yeah. So he's a good one. And he definitely has the chops as a historian, and particularly of the biblical era and Middle Ages too. I mean, it's just the building. He's also expert in how the Bible was built. So,
like the canonized or organized or right. Well, there's a whole thing there with Francis Bacon. Anyway, we don't have to go all the way into this. How do you spell his name?
John, Jon.
Uh-huh.
Hamer, Hamer. His center place is the YouTube channel name, pretty sure. And that's center, TRE, like the French Canadian spelling, center place. And yeah, he's got just lectures on fucking everything.
Oh, French Canadian. I'm so
He's from like Minnesota or something. He's American. He just lives there.
Oh, cool.
Which is nice because he's very easy, and he's got a very like aw shucks kind of style. Like he's kind of like,
that's very Minnesota.
Yeah, and it's very like, so he'll say, so this is what was happening in the Middle Ages. And it's just kind of this like, he's the only one that thinks it's kind of like worth this little chuckle, but he's got a great body of research.
That sounds great.
Fun to listen to.
Yeah, I'm really into that stuff. Okay, but so now just pretend we didn't say anything and go right back to we're on the cliff's edge of like Marvel and like the saints and the icons and old mythology, new mythology.
Right.
And then I come in with this. Now this, I'm not going to spend too much time qualifying what I'm about to read, but I tried an experiment that I heard about in a podcast. This is so meta. That involved writing first thing in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the second time that I did this, and I'm just going to skip to the part that's relevant. I think this connects to art and mythology and spirituality. Okay, so this is what it says. This brings us to the issue you received a moment ago. This is a big topic, the so-called New Age movement. An enormous number of your men and women are caught up in the dragnet of its influence. The designers and shapers of this grafted mythos/ideology love both the true seekers and egotistical, validation-seeking self-seekers as well, using a skillfully blended mythology that combines nuggets of truth scattered loosely amongst a confusing, vague, self-contradictory, and ultimately disempowering pile of lies and half-truths. New Age is merely the newest iteration of controlled opposition. As you move from the fish to the angel/stranger of the zodiac, the great group mind will naturally gravitate away from the old-fashioned, faith-based, dreamlike, and often slightly delusional version of spirituality that is represented in most, but not all, forms of modern Christianity. In its place, the men of your time will seek to pair a new and more fitting form of, quote, spirituality with the age at hand. As per usual, the controllers are one step ahead of the shifting tides of mass consciousness and use this opportunity to expertly implement their favorite strategy, the polarization dialectic. This is one of the oldest and most effective ways of controlling, indeed, of herding the men, H-E-R-D, of Earth like cattle, by directing their attention primarily at two sensorially stimulating and emotionally activating things, both of which are continuously edited, reformed, modified, reconstructed, and perverted from their original natural form until they are both positioned as diametric opposites in order to divide the masses in half and maximize the emotional and ideological voltage between two opposing groups, while also preventing them from cooperating or talking to one another long enough to recognize the falsely divided and polarized paradigm that has been created specifically to keep them from communicating as a group and pointing out their commonalities and shared grievances with the system, as this would naturally initiate a movement towards actual organic change from the bottom up, which would be disastrous for this system. New Age is a clever repurposing of several old systems that have been parboiled/blanched by stripping of their original context/meaning and a Frankenstein-esque restitching of many component parts into a sort of useful abomination that walks and talks in a reasonable facsimile of an actual spiritual tradition/practice, but isn't one. This is very sad and would normally not occur so easily, but the controllers have done an excellent job of lowering the common denominator frequency of consciousness on the Earth, reducing everyone's awareness in order to systematically destroying most of the real traditions, lineages, and memories of the past and replacing them with synthetic and artificial new versions of them that are merely there to deceive and beguile the disconnected, spiritually desperate, disenfranchised, instant gratification slash easy empowerment seeking, and intuitively weak people, especially young people. I don't want to go too far, but I felt like that plugged in just so sleekly there because, and it makes sense that it's like it's like you took all these mythologies and just threw them in a blender, and out comes like your vegan new age like Marvel universe smoothie. Like I'm just waiting. I'm sure. And they have all the identities, like you were saying. You have Iron Man, you have Captain America, like you have and it's like it's so similar to Christianity in that way. It's like, well, this is feudalism and your life is fucking just carnage. It's awful. It's just going to get worse. But look at this guy. He's so strong and he's getting the girl and he's having a great time. He can shoot lasers. Like, look at that. And it's similar, if you look at, again, we don't know what the fuck was happening during the Middle Ages. I don't want to make a statement one way or the other because it's like, yeah, it was the Black Plague and famine and death, but they also built these beautiful Gothic cathedrals that we could never duplicate. It's like, I don't know what's going on there.
Well, I'll say I really liked what you wrote there, and I think it's absolutely applicable. I mean, that was kind of crazy how well that concept meshed with what we were talking about.
Right.
And I would go, to the step of saying, if anyone, if there were a novel that existed today that were warning people about something like this, it would look a lot like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And I think what you just read is one good basic allegory that's underneath, if a lot of what you read was in a critical review of Frankenstein, it would not be out of place, because the allegory of Frankenstein has a lot to do with what you were just reading.
Oh,
because look, you can be the strongest, greatest doctor. You can do something that nobody else can do. But the result is you have to do it with this monster because you can't bring life into the world that way.
Yeah.
So
that's really interesting.
And based on the time it was written and what was going on in the world in the first part of the 1800s, it's talking about this modern world that's coming about.
Right.
Very much so. So
yeah, this thing that is this gleaming accomplishment, but it's like the elephant in the room is it's like this grotesque.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The analogy there had to do much more with nationalism and post-Napoleonic Europe, but very much that was the 1815 to 1830. That was when the modern world really started to get. That was when it was born. It was in those 15 years after Napoleon, and that's Mary Shelley, I think, wrote in 1843. Maybe that came out. Maybe in the 1860s. I don't remember. Maybe even later. Was it later? Anyway, but he was very much, I think, writing about the time of or she rather, excuse me.
Right, yeah.
I just realized he probably meant saying, I always, Percy Shelley, Mary Shelley. Anyway, but it was very much talking about, what is this Frankenstein monster that has been born, that is, what is this burgeoning modern world after the idea of kingship is basically fallen and democracies and revolutions are on the rise.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that era in history kind of sounds like it's almost like in the way that people talk about the 70s being awesome. And I'm always saying like, well, damn, that does sound really cool. The music was great and everyone had really clean acid and I don't know, it's just whatever. I mean, obviously it was the beginning of a lot of this like new age mumbo jumbo sort of like kasha, if you will. But But I don't know, it sounds cool. In a similar way, when I think back to that time of like Mary Shelley and like the little collective she was running with, where they would just like go into a castle and like do a whole bunch of opium and create art, I was like, damn, that sounds like a cool fucking scene. Like, damn,
It helped
in
that
a
they were
way.
all very wealthy.
Well, yeah,
They came
right.
from wealthy families. But yeah, I mean,
Definitely.
and you see that all throughout history, whether it's the Paris art scene in the turn of the century, the Impressionists through to the Picasso's and all the people that were hanging out in Paris particularly pre World War II, but pre World War One especially more so. But yeah, where there's artists basically, and a lot of those guys were less well to do, but they just get together and drink wine, and yeah, if they had some hash or something,
Yeah.
great. But yeah, just hang out and write and paint and whatever it is that they do. So there's I always like that they're, at least of late, and I think this probably happened more in the past than we're aware of, because I think a lot of those smaller artistic niches, and say if that happened in the 1600s, weren't really, nobody talked about them. They didn't survive because they weren't official. So it could have been that they were going on longer, but at least in recent history, to see these kind of associates of artists kind of setting out, we're going to go to, the woods for a week and just do this, it's great to see. And a lot
Yeah.
of interesting work comes out of it. I mean,
Yeah, I mean that's
two
always
of horror's probably the two most well-known horror books came out of a weekend on Lake whatever they were in Switzerland.
right. Yeah, yeah. I feel like that's just something it's tough. I mean, it's cool to connect, with just like people like us, or just any artist, that I establish some rapport with. It gives me a lot of, it feels like the antidote to the gradually descending insanity that is taking me over, because the world is, just looking at the media, like everything is just, the same way that if you go into a grocery store, 90% of things are either just sugar or poison or both, like wrapped in a variously colored package. There's a meme that I saw that was like the amount of breakdown of time I spend in the grocery store. 1% buy things, 99% pick up a product, see poison, and put it back on the shelf. I'm just like, that's fucking me to a T. Like, just, and so yeah, I feel like that fear factor is just so prevalent that, literally, I told you this I think last time. I don't know if it made it into the cut, but I spent like a year and a half being like, tomorrow I will paint. I just want to paint. And then I would go online and I'd read some even alternative news article and be like, there's no time to paint. I have to buy black beans. And like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, I thought I was prepared yesterday, but I don't have a ferro rod, or like, I don't have magnesium. What if it rains and the roof caves in and the rain comes in the house, and then I need to light a fire in the house to cook my black beans? Just like this fucking vortex. And I don't know, I guess I had to talk to some people, mainly like other artists or creative people or just like soul people, to have them be like, yeah, but I mean, like, yeah, let's be prepared, but like, dude, what the fuck? Like, don't you want to enjoy life a little bit? Like, there's things that you enjoy doing, not everything. There's a balance there too, because I think Mark's message is really important, where he's like, not everything feels good. And that is something you should remember if you want to accomplish something. But then there's also like, yeah, but in nature, the things that feel good are the things that nature itself is encouraging you to do. Like, that's why you're there, is to do those things for some purpose. So for me, and that purpose is not always clear in the moment. I think that's such a core thing with art, like it's not like, having a really well-rounded portfolio with like Tesla and Pfizer stock that's like, got a great fucking, it's going to mature in 3 years and you can buy like, a fucking mansion on Lake Tahoe or whatever, if they haven't burned that whole part of the country down by then.
Tahoe might be safe for now. It's a nice resort.
I love that area. Oh my God. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. Like, it's, whew. But I digress. Anyway, yeah, I feel like, it's important to do the things that make you feel good, and you don't know what the repercussions are going to be, you know. And I do feel that, you know, we're in this world to embody a certain energy. Everybody embodies a certain, you know, unique energy. And we bring down that energy, and then we like sort of are like a conduit or resonator. We emanate that energy out into the world. And you never know who will like what you're doing, who will respond to it, when, how, in what way, how that might inspire them in totally unpredictable ways. And so, you know, and that really, I would say that applies almost the most to things like, you know, visual art and design and, you know, creating form, but also writing. Because those are, to me at least, like drawing and writing are like those are like the main like forms of like, I don't want to say witchcraft, but like true alchemy of the mind, because words are conceptual forms. They're conceptual containers, and drawing is like if you have a pen, any kind of pen, you can make a black line. That black line is like some of the most powerful magic, because it creates, it separates form and space. You know, it's so interpretational. But again, if you speak the language of form and space enough, if you have eyes, you know, that's a great start. You can draw a square, and then write just that line that connects in that way at that geometry. Someone looks at that and they think, bam, that's an enclosed object, and around it is empty space. You know, you're interacting at a very high level with the way they see the world, you know. And then, you know, like, and this is my evolution with visual art, is like, you know, for a while it was just that kind of stuff and natural forms, you know. And then I, you know, you learn how to draw, like, I feel like every young boy wants to draw dragons, you know. So like, you know, you draw that type of shit, and you realize how to make that look somewhat realistic, you know. And then, you know, maybe you get into shading, you know, and then you get into different mediums. And it's like, I think writing is very similar, really, to me, because I don't know, they're both just so powerful. Although with writing, you know, the person has to have the patience to like, you know, because with drawing, it's like with visual art in general, you know, you're just, the beauty of it, even though it takes so much work and effort and painstaking like meticulousness, once you're done, the person can be really stupid and their eyes will do all the work.
Mhm.
You're just working with, you know, the wiring
Yeah.
of their eye. I mean, they may not feel anything from it, but anyway.
Well, the two, yeah. So I agree that drawing, and I'll take writing just one step further back,
Go for it.
which is the oral storytelling tradition.
Yes.
That's where it all comes from, because before we had the means to write stuff down, it had to be memorized in order to be transmitted in the proper fashion, or at least loosely memorized to the point where, you know, kind of the major points might be there, and then, you know, this generation, this old guy told it a little bit differently in this section or whatever. But
And they say our memory was a lot better before we used written language. Did you? So I find that fascinating.
yeah, so it's a slight little comment, you know. But yeah, and oh, so here's what I was gonna. That's what I was gonna take it back to, is all this time we've been talking, or for a while we've been talking about the idea of this new religious pantheon coming through the Marvel universe, and the real original. I would say I could make this argument that the oral storytelling tradition was in fact theater, although proto theater. But if someone's telling you a story just out of their mind, you know, from off the top of their head or from something that they've memorized, again, it'll probably be a little different even each time they tell it.
Right. Like immersive theater, which is very much what it would have been like.
So then the only time that story is experienced is if you're there in that person's presence at that one time they told that story. And then if you're there 2 nights later, they'll tell that story slightly differently. You know, think going to a play on one night, going to a play 2 nights later, you're not going to see the exact same performance. It'll be similar, probably really similar, but there will be differences, maybe not even noticeable to the casual audience, man. But the whole point is that and religion are the same thing, or were initially, I should say. When religion was conceived, it was likely, hey, let's use this oral storytelling tradition to then and broadcast one story out there to people to get everybody on the same page. And then we control the narrative, we control the people. The way that, the person in the town, the old man that knows the story is the most dignified, for that. He's trusted, he's wise, he knows the stories, he knows the lessons you're supposed to learn. Well, if we give them the story, they'll assume the same thing about us.
Wow.
And so that theater and religion are intricately linked. And I would say that before religion was religion and theater were essentially indistinguishable, and religion and the oral storytelling tradition indistinguishable. Oral storytelling, theater, and religion before, I don't know, 6,000 or 8,000 BC or 10,000 years ago, maybe approximately, there was no difference between those three concepts. Religion was theater, was the oral storytelling tradition.
Right. Yeah. This just, I mean, you already know this is bringing me back to that book by Joseph P. Farrell. It's like, it's all, and I guess I'm interested in that era you're talking about when they were all still fused together. What exactly, and I guess we'll never know. That's what makes it so interesting. What was supplanted? Then again, I think of like native culture, and it just seems like the way that mythology was used. And if you don't mind, I found another quick snippet that just like, I just want to take another few shots at New Age while I still have a chance.
I'm all for that.
I was gonna say, I feel like what was supplanted, the organic, like, good version of whatever you want to call it, mythology, spirituality, that was more of like very much like a science of psychosomatic biofeedback. I don't know what to call it, but like basically like, because back then it didn't matter, like, I don't know, it almost becomes immaterial whether people believed it or not, because if you have this fire dance and you told this story about like, these gods, and like people got really fired up by that stuff, it and I think this is a fascinating concept with both spirituality and religion, whether it's Christians or whoever. Like, they've proven through experiments that just belief in these things creates a lot of measurable, demonstratable effects, like both in the brain and the body. Like, if you believe that some magical divine energy is coming down and healing you, like, you are much better off than if you believe that we all sort of bubbled up out of a chemical soup, and hopefully the shot that the doctor puts in your butt cheek is gonna maybe make you feel better, like that. You know what I'm saying? So that belief. So I feel like I would even add, because you have those three things, theater, religion, and oral storytelling, and I would add sort of like science of mind, that like arm of natural philosophy that deals with like like that alchemical idea that like we're all getting that energy from somewhere else, and the belief.
Ultimately at this time, even saying that religion, oral storytelling, and theater are the same thing, that's actually kind of a limiting statement for the reality, I think, of what the situation likely was, which was so connected were all of these things that there was really fundamentally no difference between natural philosophy, astrology, theater, oral storytelling tradition, psychology, proto-psychology, educate, just basic child rearing, all these stories were there to tell you the way to be in the world. The stories are there to tell you how to get the most out of the world around you. And the more that the stories are realized as, this is an allegory for something in nature, and you're supposed to learn from the story. It's not going to bring all the knowledge to you. You have to use it to kind of start to think and start to look at the world and put all these things, astrology, into perspective, and the natural world and the seasons, and just the cycle of life and interpersonal relationships, and all of these things. You start to see them through these different lenses, and that ultimately is what is shaping your entire worldview. At the time, it was very much based on nature and the small group of people that you associated with.
I think it's really important to point out that they also, I mean, I don't think there was a distinction between the divine and the mundane,
Right.
like and just like probably there was no distinction between synchronicity and coincidence,
Right.
because people, really fundamentally what they believed in at the core of everything was meaning. They just believed that this world was overflowing with meaning. And I mean, for better or for worse, that's a beautiful way of looking at life. I mean, and that's actually that I'll read this right from that because this connects really well. But I think definitely they're trying to make this world where they've sort of like they've created this schism, like,
Hmm.
and it's been hundreds of years in the making, because it's like, oh, we had this like, kind of biblical like magical thing with God and the man on the chair in the sky, and like we decided that wasn't so great, so we packed it up and we put it in the old dusty box. We've like said the words, we got the priest to bless the coffin, and like we're done with that now. Now you go to the urgent care and you get shot up with whatever, you worship the rod with the two snakes and the
Hmm.
wings, whether you know it or not. So in that sense, I almost feel like that element of natural law of consent, in my mind, it's becoming a little shaky. I'm like, damn, how little consent does the cosmos require? Like, these poor people don't know anything. They don't know what the fuck is going on. It almost feels
Well,
like consent, it can be obtained through distraction.
yeah,
And that's where the Marvel stuff.
nature doesn't differentiate between tacit consent and explicit consent. There's no differentiation. That's a human construct.
Right.
All nature sees is whether you're choosing to do something or not. That's part of how
Right.
natural law works. It doesn't
Wow.
whether
Yeah.
whether
Right.
whether you're ignorant or nascent or whatever, that doesn't matter.
Right.
Still works the exact same way.
So like, yeah, the universe doesn't acknowledge rationalizations or excuses. That's not
Exactly.
factored
Exactly.
in. It's just what you do. I really like that. All right, wait, let me read this before we go soaring off onto another um,
Please do.
journey. Okay, so uh, the New Age movement does contain nuggets of truth meant to lure in the masses, but it is also peppered with many delusions and much conflicting information, as well as a toxic form of solipsism repainted as oneness in a way that encourages narcissism, selfishness, entity possession, emotional coldness slash recklessness when dealing with others, and a false empowerment based on sex, fame, popularity, and external validation, aka social media, while actually weakening the true spiritual power emanating from within a person. I'm editing this because it gets really esoteric and I don't know if that belongs here. No, I'll just read it. No, fuck it. Spiritual power, which comes from the spiritual fire emanating from the core of the geometry of the energy body, also known as the Merkabah seed crystal, which is actually drained of its subtle energy through belief in this smeared out, sterilized, artificially constructed way of thinking that gradually cuts one off from reality. Da 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 da. Okay, this is the part that I thought was really good because I kept thinking about theosophy, and I know you were too, and that whole thing, and how they essentially, like they they were the ones manning the printing press when New Age was first minted, if you will. Like they
Sure.
were they
Yeah.
were the
Yeah.
ones
Yeah.
kind of okay. Uh, One's life can be negatively affected from delving too deeply and taking New Age beliefs and prognostications found on the internet, where anyone can create a sensation by saying anything they please, far too seriously. Um, know how subversive and damaging this belief system can be. It draws in Western individuals who harbor a deep longing for a spiritual belief system that goes against the grain of the old fashioned monotheist religions in the mainstream. New Age is seen as a hip, young, new, and exciting prospect full of stories of magic and human potential among various Native American / traditional stories, myths, and legends, mixed with Atlantis and Lemuria, Hyperborea and Terra, Norse and Vedic mythologies, etc. It is the perfect quote unquote path to lead seekers astray in the age of the internet, age of Aquarius, as it lures them in based on legitimate craving on the part of the seeker, a craving for truth, belonging, and the need for new and exciting information, aka novelty, that has been engendered in everyone to an increasing degree the more everyone uses the internet for everything. Much like the internet itself, the New Age paradigm has seen a gradual refinement from its origins, which are difficult to discern, to its current position as a colossal marketing campaign / corporate money transfer that takes advantage of the majority's general dissatisfaction and ennui towards what has been painted as the old, outdated, and toxic holdover from a bygone age, namely organized religion. Yeah, it just goes on. So much came out of me. And then and then it says, while there are many huge problems with organized religion, it contains or contained at its core many much more profound and accessible spiritual truths than can be reliably extracted from the sterile one-size-fits-all hodgepodge of random ideas and information that constitute the New Age movement. Unfortunately, the controller's methodical elimination of spiritual literacy among the mainstream, which is composed of a balance between one's connection to memory and one's connection. Okay, yeah, so this is just like devolves now into things. It's a lot. But I just wanted to say that because I think that's what we're talking about. And I think it's just confusing people and leading them astray. And I really do think it's connected to the elimination of, I guess, what our modern version of the oral tradition, which is just our idea of history and personal history, and like, oh, my family came here at such and such a year. They're trying to take all that shit from us, because now, like, if you're European, you don't, you know what I mean? It's like it's like Blade Runner. You know how everything in Blade Runner is Japanese, and it's like that's like the new sexy, like this was in the 80s. It's kind of crazy that that's how everything ended up. They're like, oh, this is what's popular now, and I just feel like
and part of that, I think it should be noted, because I'm a pretty big fan of his work generally. Part of the aesthetic for Blade Runner came from Vancouver, where William Gibson lives and writes. And it's Vancouver, Canada is a very Asian, tons of Asian influence. So he brought some of that in. So yeah, it might have been prescient for him. It might have been kind of a prediction, but it also could have been just kind of his general sensibility from being from that part of the world. I don't know for sure, but
right,
it's in a lot of his work. But you're right. You're right. Because he wasn't the only one. I guess now that I think about it. That is a good example, and one of many, though.
Well, to me, it's kind of, it's sort of amputating that personal connection.
Mm-hmm.
Like, whoa, what's my personal connection to history? Like, what, let me think, oh, what did, when I was a kid, like, what kind of food did my grandma make? Like, I have my own language that I learned first, and they're kind of like, no, that doesn't matter, like, what you remember about your life. It doesn't matter what your family did, don't think about that. Like, we're telling you what's cool. We're telling you what's trendy. Like, we're giving you this mythology, and look, you can all be the same. Everyone's excited about Iron Man and Captain America, like everyone, and there are other versions of it, but I really think the Marvel thing, that's why I was psyched that I wrote that down, because like they're really channeling. It's like everyone I see is either wearing a NASA t-shirt or a fucking Marvel t-shirt. It's ridiculous. Like, I get it, they sell them both at Walmart, but Jesus, like, if you pay attention to like a lot of these like Gen Z kids, it's like, oh my God, like, I'm just like, I'd rather you guys were wearing like burlap or like a plain t-shirt with nothing on it. But it's like everyone, like the factory ran out of variety, and they I don't know.
It goes back to that idea that it's not, we don't consume the occasional piece of media anymore. And what the whole point is to, you have to have something coming in. But when there's no nutrient value in any of it, so to speak,
Right.
you have to eat a lot of it in order to feel any sort of, sustenance. So this whole idea of, it's kids are into Teletubbies this year, but next year it's Barney, the year after it's Paw Patrol, the year after it's PJ Masks. What other kids shit do I know about right now? But it's always this, and that branding, it's a full changeover in the branding. When this is the new thing, you're into this thing or this thing. And then when you get to a certain age, now you change all your branding over to, now you're into, you're teenager, so now you're into sports, and now you wear a bunch of sports stuff, or now you're into Marvel movies, so you're, whatever it is. But yeah,
it's like the high fashion of mythology. Like, this is the fall collection of trendy shit. Like, we're done with last year.
Because we know that, well, first of all, we want to create as much extra work and byproduct and garbage really as possible. But then, yeah, it's consumerism meets the Sneetches with stars, and then they go in, and then, oh, now I have 3 stars. No, I got to go back. I get 1 taken off and 2 added, and you were fine without.
Right. Well, yeah, before I forget, I wanted to, that's such a good, and you mentioned that before, like the thing about, how things are, like, they're so low. I guess the way I would put it, I like this whole idea, like prana or chi or etheric energy. Like, it's just like the good shit, for lack of a better description. Like the real, like I was saying, like spiritual power, spiritual fire. It's like there's, and that's what I believe is common across all of these religions and mythologies. They all were like, okay, look, like there's some good shit out there, and it's literally why all of this is possible. And like, that's what makes you alive. It's what makes you you. Like, it's why that tree is like, beaming and treeing right now. It's why that chipmunk is fucking jetting around chipmunking, and that hummingbird is hummingbirding, for lack of better verbs. It's like, that's the good shit. You want that, you want to have a really good source of that, direct line to that. You want to just be drinking that in. And somewhere along the line, we were duped hard in this idea that, more is better. We were duped with regard to diet and I just think that thing that you said, it's such an interesting concept to think about, because it's so pervasive. It's like, it's in how we relate to food nowadays, because all these things used to be sacred, right? Food used to be sacred. Sex was the most sacred thing. Storytelling was sacred. Science was, these things were all like, they were afforded the proper level of respect, because all of those things connect to like this force of like life-givingness and like just like mystical, like, ooh.
And just our general attempt to try and understand this.
Right. The ineffable.
And this whole thing. Yeah.
And yeah, and I feel like the more you kind of, really, the more people actually, post-industrial revolution and, and postmodernism, that was really, and this touches on what we talked about last time, which is the precedent was set with like the Enlightenment, and like, it's really very brilliantly done, where they're like, oh yeah, we tried, like, and it's sort of equating like having any sort of system where something is sacred, or having any system where, you give thanks for, like equating that with this like really clunky Christian, catch-all model, and saying like, same way that with communism in the USSR, where they're like, no, we tried, like, we tried people sort of we tried putting power in not the hands of a select few, and it didn't work. So we're just going back to that now. I don't know. I feel like, but what you made me think of with that whole thing is, in Buddhism, they have the realms, right? They have the concepts of all the different realms. I was just thinking, this is something I think about frequently. and everybody's always talking about like, oh, my pandemic weight, because everyone was just at home like snacking. I mean, it really makes a lot of sense. It's like, people do that in the winter a lot, right? But it's like we had a whole year that was like a winter where I was like, well, I guess I'm just gonna sit inside with my thumb in my ass eating Cheez-Its. Like, it's just like, what else do you really do? And I think part of it is also the psychology of humans, where it's like, well, what we want control over something. We want to have a control, a control valve for like, give me some kind of predictable good experience, damn it, and like drugs are expensive. So they're used up more rapidly than food, hopefully, usually. And so you just
so I was like 14 maybe.
uh-huh.
My good friend growing up, his stepdad was Welsh. And he was driving us to a hockey tournament, and so we showed up at this outdoor park that had it was an outdoor roller hockey tournament. And on the side of the chain link fence with the boards, there's a billboard or one of those signs that's draped up there, and it's Dare, the Dare campaign.
Right.
So Dare had sponsored this tournament or something. And we're walking up to this thing, and like I said, I'm probably 14, and he, in his English Welsh accent, just turns to us and says, "Dare, drugs are really expensive." He just keeps walking without missing a beat. And I was just like, did he just say that? It stuck with me ever since, but
that's hilarious.
Totally tangential.
Well, I was pretty much done anyway. No, I just wanted to say, in Buddhism, they have the different realms. Mm-hmm. And I've really been thinking about that a lot lately, because that shit's really interesting. They say like the human birth is the most fortuitous birth, because all of the other realms are like too preoccupied with some bullshit that doesn't actually like encourage true spiritual growth. Like the devas are like, they're just like smoking hookah, hashish, and like, getting, fellatio, like, like they're in this like pleasure realm. And like they have all the knowledge, they have no reason to grow at all. So really they can only kind of like fall, because there's not enough struggle for them. And then I forget, I don't know, the Ashuras are too like angry, like they're attached to like rage karma. So really it's kind of like, it's like, the karmic experience that you've internalized to the point where you're just like repeating that pattern, and you're, whether it's a good or a bad pattern, like you just keep repeating that pattern. So you're very limited in how much you can learn if you keep doing the same thing over again, which is very natural law. And then the realm that you made me think of is the hungry ghost realm, where these hungry ghosts have, I don't know if you've heard of this. I fucking love this image. These hungry ghosts are drawn. Here, I'll draw one. They're drawn like this. It's an art podcast.
I'll have to screenshot the drawing. Put it on the...
Yeah, they almost look like fat hummingbirds. This is like the body of one. So they're drawn with huge bloated stomachs and tiny little pinprick mouths to symbolize that they have this raging bottomless hunger that they could never ever satisfy. Just strictly by the fact of their anatomy, like they have this hunger, they identify so deeply with this hunger, and they're motivated and driven by this like, oh, like I need to fill myself. But they can never, the rate at which they consume it, even if all they do is try to fill it, they could never satisfy it because of that, not imbalance, but the way that works. And so I just feel like that is, like, what doesn't that apply to today? It applies to money, it applies to food, it applies to sex, it applies to like, just go to church as much as you can, and like then you'll be really spiritual. It's how convenient, or like it doesn't matter what you do, like you just have to say, you just have to like prostrate yourself before Jesus, and like you just have to really mean it often.
Or you just have to on your deathbed just Go to
Oh, right.
Christ, and then confess and ask for forgiveness, and you're good to go.
Back in
Whatever
the
it is.
day,
Yeah,
couldn't you like just pay to have all your sins forgiven or
yeah.
something?
Oh yeah. In the Middle Ages, the indulgences they were selling basically. So if your mother-in-law dies, and the church says, oh, she was a good woman, but of course she's still going to go to purgatory because nobody's perfect. But don't worry, she'll only be in purgatory for 5 years instead of 10 years if you buy this thing. You buy this piece of paper from the church. And those were called indulgences, and that basically helped to foment. I mean, that was in the common narrative anyway. That was one of the basic underlying things that sprung the Protestant Reformation.
Right, because they just took it too far.
Yeah, and they've been doing shit like kind
Yeah.
of more subtle like that for years. The papacy in the Middle Ages and early kind of Renaissance was pretty hysterical. And there were
Yeah.
3 popes at one time, which is funny.
Wow. Yeah, it's all very pyramid scheme. That's why I always say, like, the more I don't know, the more experiences a person has had where you're just like fed up and just, like you just end up flipping out uh over how ridiculous and how pervasive like these Ponzi scheme type systems are in our world, like, and how people seem to like really do well and thrive, the more like just deeply narcissistic and kind of like completely apathetic to the experience of others and how they're influencing the experience of others. Those people just tend to rise to the top, and it's like I'm frustrated by that because when like certain people who shall not be named that are very close to me, there's a limit to how much you can get through to people when they're like, well, I haven't experienced that. I feel like, the world is mostly full of good people. And it's like, yeah, the world is mostly full of good people. But then there's that one group of people that just will not quit with the fuckery. And like, they're really evil. If evil exists at all, they're it. But until someone has encountered friction with that stuff in their personal life, there's just no way you can't. You can have both had an experience. You can say, oh, we shared that experience, but you both had it separately. You have to just have it. You can't inject an experience into someone.
Yeah.
You
can't you can't go down, nobody else can walk down the road for you. Yeah, and that's, oh gosh, there's so much with the realms and New Age. The question that I had written down before we started that I was hoping that we'd kind of come to, and I think we kind of have, as we answered what art was yesterday, last episode.
right.
The question for this episode that I kind of had outlined is, so why is art important? If we're here talking about it, take an hour and a half, 2 hours to define it for you. Why are we going to continue to talk about it? And this is where the conversation that we're having starts to contact this question, because the real tough thing about all of this whole experience, and what enables one person with a bad motive to get someone to do something that they wouldn't necessarily do if they had all the information in front of them, is to find some way to get the person you are trying to work to believe something that's not true. Belief is a very tricky thing, and always should be kept an eye on, because belief, as I'll take Robert Anton Wilson, maybe my favorite succinct quote about belief, is the death of intelligence. When you believe, you stop thinking about something, you just accept it. And when people get deeply roped into a worldview, and I wrote this down earlier, as much as it's about a one world government, this is about a one world view. And when you can get everybody on board with that view, or a vast majority of people, and all believing the same lie. Now they're reinforcing the lie by kind of monitoring and policing each other,
Mm-hmm.
as well as making sure that they never think of the contradiction that they're holding in their head, never really see that belief drawn into the light. Because as soon as you start to put a belief out into the light, you start to have to examine it, and then you start to think about it, and no, you're no longer believing it because you're thinking about it.
Right.
You don't think about things you believe in. You just believe them. You don't believe things you think about, because once you start thinking about them, you're not believing them, you're thinking about them. So belief is tricky, and always, I think it's imperative for the individual, in order to gain the best possible life, to constantly be re-examining what they are holding as belief. Why is art important? Because art is a very good way to make you remember that your beliefs aren't necessarily true, the way that this character's belief system may not necessarily be true, the way that this artist's presentation of this scene might not represent something that's actually true, but rather is trying to tell you something about, hey, why am I showing you something that's a little not true? Because maybe you'll examine it and go, I'm holding on to
Right.
something in my mind that's a little not true. And now I can start thinking about that belief and come to a resolution. And in doing so, live in more in alignment with nature and what's really going on around you. So that's, to me, that is the fundamental, because belief is such a tricky thing. We got to keep our eyes out all the time for it. And most of the narrative, most of this one world view that's being peddled is not, it's the belief funnel. It's not the, hey, let's present art that enables critical thinking.
Yeah. Wow. There was a lot there. I've always, yeah, my statement was just that I've said many times in life is, the most dangerous thing you can do is believe something. As far as like, um, return on, I don't know, just, in terms of like where you're putting your energy, and like, yeah, like you said, I love Robert Anton Wilson. I really actually would love to go back over his work because it's been a while. Um, but I think it's really interesting because what you were saying also applies to the beliefs that most people hold. The art can affect you in that personal way of like, look, and that's really powerful. For example, if you're like, if you have a really like rigid, limiting belief in like one of the, the big three monotheistic religions, I feel like that can be really, damaging, especially if it's like, I mean, really any of them, and to each his own. Some people find it empowering. There's different ways of being religious, just like there's different ways of being spiritual. But yeah, I think art, and I think really like the more we talk about it, the more art and psychedelics start to sound like two manifestations of the same type of tool, because that type of tool gives you the ability to choose something that you didn't necessarily realize you had a choice regarding,
Right.
namely your beliefs. And it's, and like really, I mean, with psychedelics, that is like the quintessential, experience, or the quintessential good version of the experience. Obviously we have, the Charles Manson situation. You can also, you can make a tighter and scarier box around someone. It just makes you very suggestible. But I think there's a certain self-awareness, I guess maybe with psychedelics and with art, where a person has to have that meta moment where they're like, oh, whoa, I am really suggestible. There might be nothing else to this thing we call mind and consciousness than this like weird amorphous relationality. The distinctions start to dissolve, and you're like, damn, I'm, my beliefs, like we were talking about drawing and the black line, like your beliefs are the black line. They determine what is the object, what is the enclosed space, how the two are interacting and relating to each other. Like they determine everything. And, but I think it's a balance, because I mean, I feel like if you have no beliefs, like that's also a shitty place to be. you know, because then you're just over intellectualizing things to the point where you have sort of no like anchor, no mooring, and you're like, you know, floating around.
Right.
I mean, I guess it depends. Again, it depends on how it's used, but
And you know, so for me, I would answer that because I try and hold as few beliefs as possible, and I don't know that zero is the optimal number, but regardless, I try to take those things like I believe, or you can put it this way, I believe that all of this is going, everything that goes on is going on for the betterment of humanity in some way. You know, nature is working. For to just put it this way, I believe nature is working correctly. Really, what that means to me, that's kind of a I wouldn't exactly phrase it that way, although to some people I would, because I wouldn't want to bog them down with this explanation, which is I think nature is working the way it's supposed to and will continue to hold that thought in mind as the way the universe works is my kind of, you know, I will hold that in mind until better evidence comes along to suggest something else. And then I'll look at that and start to build a new belief, you know, a new worldview. But the whole idea is, and it goes back to consent a little bit too, because those beliefs that you just take in and blindly believe without thinking about, you're essentially consenting to that being your worldview in a tacit manner. Whereas properly done, I think, you should examine those things and, you know, choose which things you want to hold as part of your worldview or your belief structure, however you want to call it. But those things should be examined. And so then I would question whether they're beliefs at that point, or whether you go, I believe this, and now I think it's probable, but I'm, you know, maybe there'll be new information, and when new information comes along, I'm going to take it in light of everything else, and might totally change my mind. It might not.
yeah, I it's interesting. I want to just bring in a quick comparison to science and how, and I agree with you. And those are the beliefs I hold, and I just try to hold. And Robert Anton Wilson says this. It's like, you know, if you're gonna pick a reality tunnel, pick the best damn reality tunnel that you can. Like, you know, the most fun, most empowering. And so that's kind of, I mean, maybe took me, you know, like a better part of a decade to sort my shit out and realize that like that really is best practice to like just
And you know,
keep the good ones.
the kind of, you know, stumbling block I think for a lot of people was that they took that sentiment of Wilson's and folks like him at the time and said, well, okay, so I'm going to choose the best belief, you know, worldview that I the most enjoyable one, but forgot to make it yes, but it also has to be based in reality. And that's where you get that new age kind of spin-off,
Yeah.
which becomes, well, I'm just going to hold the worldview where everything is happy and good and nothing bad should be looked at or talked about. Because,
And
okay,
yeah,
that makes you feel good, but that's not as connected to reality as it could be.
the key there is, yeah, is the feel good piece, but it's again, it's the difference between, you know, because a worldview that's connected to beliefs and emotions. But if that is putting a muzzle on your conscious mind and your intellectual mind, then you have a fucking problem
Mm-hmm.
because it's, oh, I want to only feel good. I want to, you know, and that's a tricky thing. I think that's like up there in spiritual evolution, just realizing that, you know, oh, like, yeah, I do give power to whatever I believe in. I give it a lot of power. And I sort of, in a way, take power away from the things that I question, which
Mm-hmm.
is good if you're constantly under assault of all sorts of bullshit that are trying to disempower you and make you fearful and make you sort of sit still and, you know, be a good little sort of dog, you know? But it all comes back to, are you the master of your domain? Do you have your shit straight? Do you understand what both of those tools are for? Belief, you know, the spiritual sort of component of you, which is, I would argue, more powerful in the positive way. You know, like it's like additive, and then you have like the negative, more like, I don't know, electron version, which is like the intellect, which is more reductive. It's like it can sort of like, you know, sap the power out of things through that incisive, like analytical, like, oh, okay, let's see, and you pull it apart. You know, you're literally so. Yeah, and I think people get confused, especially with New Age, because they're like, oh, okay, so these beliefs, these feel good, you know? Yeah, universal oneness, fucking kumbaya, like that's great, you know? I love that. I love it so much that, yo, I guess that means I should shut down all of my senses and my intellect to any evidence of the contrary. And it's that black and whiteness, the same kind that you really find in Christianity, you know, where I don't want to keep harping on Christianity. Some of the most awesome people I know
Yeah.
are,
I think it's just the religion that you and I are most familiar with.
it's like the you know, the horse that takes the lashes now. It really is in society. Yeah, but yeah, it's just, you know, this idea that like, oh, well, that's all good or like that's all bad. And it's like, well, no, nothing is ever, until, yeah, I don't know.
And the
That's,
Bible certainly, you know, maybe to save face for those Christian friends of ours that are listening. There's plenty of people that are not Christians that would just as soon get rid of the Bible, which is silly. Not every Christian is good or bad. Not everything in the Bible is good or bad. And actually, there's some nuggets in there. I think we were talking about this already, but there's some things in there that are very much based in truth. And yeah, like you said from that first excerpt, that oftentimes it's, you know, truth sprinkled in a field of half truths and lies and whatnot. But nonetheless, there can still be value to be gained. And yeah, but it's all about that eclectic, you know, not just shutting down a source that might have potentially useful information just because you have some preconceived belief about the source. If you believe all Christians are wrong and some Christian comes along and says, hey, your house is on fire, you know, you might not respond in the way that you should, that's most beneficial and appropriate to with the reality of the situation. Just because your preconceived notions regarding that group.
mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I feel like somewhere in the Bible it even says like there's a lot of nuggets in there. I mean, to sort of default back to what I said earlier, you know, I really think, you know, reading the Bible in English now in 2021, being just a sort of a run of the mill person and reading it and kind of making a judgment on it one way or another of like, oh yeah, this is great. This is the best thing ever. I'm going to live my whole life by this one book. This is everything I need. On one extreme, and on the other extreme saying, what a load of crap. This whole thing is useless, is like somebody who works at the checkout counter at 7-Eleven walking up to like an electrical engineering manual and then reading it cover to cover and being like, you know, judging it, you know, or condemning it like one way or another. It's like, you are not in a position, you weren't there when this was written. You don't know what these people are talking about. You don't know who this is written for. You don't know what it is meant to teach, what information it's meant to disseminate, how it's encoded, what type of things or symbols or concepts you need to be familiar with. Like, you don't know anything. Not to mention, let's add the fact that that engineering manual was translated from the fucking Lascaux cave into Swahili and then into something else, and then you got it in, I don't know, Hindi if you work at this checkout counter 7-Eleven, just to be stereotypical, whatever, you know, like that's something that I always think about with that.
I've been studying the Bible off and on my entire life. I'm almost 40. So, you know, 25, 30 years easily of study on and off, you know, something I'm always coming back to, but I don't know the bulk of those questions. I don't know the answer to the bulk of those questions. And I don't know if anybody really does at this point. You know, it's one of those sands of history things, and there's so many iterations. That's a good thing to point out too. There's so many retranslations, reiterations, you know. This book is in this canon, but not that canon, but in this canon.
Yeah, there were like 200 books, and they put in like what, like I don't know, like 5. What is it like? I don't even know. That's one. Matthew, Mark, Luke. Is Mark even in there?
Yeah, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John are the 4. So yeah,
like what happened to the other 150? You know, it's a lot.
Well, yeah, and some of them are in the Orthodox Bible. Some of them are actually in the Catholic Bible. Like the Maccabees books are all in the Catholic Bible. Those are the Old Testament. But I can't remember exactly which other gospels are in the Orthodox Bible, but
Like the Eastern Orthodox?
yeah.
I'm fascinated by Eastern Orthodox. I gotta say, that is a cool ass. Like some of their music, I'm like, what is going on here? Like that is just otherworldly. Like
I got the chance to go to an Eastern Orthodox service when I was in college for actually as a homework assignment project. So
whoa,
it was really cool. Long but neat.
yeah, that just
Better than a
seems
Catholic mass for my money, but
yeah, just I mean, I don't know. I guess coming from Russia, like Eastern Orthodox, it's like really, it just seems so different from like Catholicism and like the Western version of it's. So like yeah, I mean, I could talk about it's like weird and it feels opulent and sacred without being quite as like self-righteous and gluttonous. Like there's maybe because I don't know, maybe I'm just a pompous whatever, but I feel like Eastern European culture was very like much more, I don't know, like I don't know, whatever. But yeah, I was gonna say I have a couple other things. Damn, like so what is okay, so New Age, trying to identify a thread. I guess it comes out in the wash with the editing process, I hope.
We'll figure it out.
Cool.
It's like that part at the end of the Bill Hicks. Well, what's the point to my act? Is there a point to my act? There probably should be. That's what I'm getting paid for.
Do you believe the Bill Hicks is Alex Jones thing? Have you heard that?
I've never heard that.
They look the same, and he like Bill Hicks died. No, Bill Hicks.
I know. I get.
He had a character named Alex Jones that he would do.
Oh, I didn't know about that. Really?
Yeah. Yeah, you can probably dig it up. He had like a character that was this like angry, crazy, like conspiracy dude, like Alex Jones. It's crazy. At the very least, he had a character named Alex that like was that.
Okay.
Anyway, I just tangent.
I don't know.
City.
It's entirely possible. I just don't. There's not a strong enough resemblance.
I don't know. I guess my friend was
fake. Don't get me
showing me
wrong.
that. Yeah, just like you got some kind of
and the rise. They're both from Texas. Alex Jones was really getting started shortly after Bill Hicks had died.
Allegedly, there's like no pictures of Alex Jones as a kid. I don't know. Whatever. Do with that what you will. One thing I was going to say is you mentioned something at the beginning about trying to get people to consume as much. This goes back to like the low nutritional value thing. Mm-hmm. Trying to get people to sort of the consumption behavior of people with regard to like pretty much anything has become very like fervent and frantic of like, oh, I just got to get, like a squirrel, like gathering acorns for a cold winter. Like, gotta get as much as I can, and I think the internet, which I mentioned in that little thing that I read, I think the internet has been instrumental in, and pornography has been instrumental in really fracturing our attention and our discernment with regard to like, wait, what is even worth watching or knowing? Like, does this feel good, or did someone convince me that it feels good? And I know I've done it before, and I mean I've read about it before, and last time, and I feel like it's connected to, and now I'm not making it, although this does apply to sexual arousal, but I'm talking about strictly like neurological, the state of arousal. Because if you read a really fearful article, you are in a very high state of arousal. If it's like the supply chain, yada yada, the Wuhan flu, all this stuff, like they're hitting your nervous system. You're going to be releasing, and those are very similar states. It's just the state of sexual arousal is more rooted in the body. It's more like the body portion of the endocrine system is more engaged, you know, although they both are, you know, you can't get that like jacked up adrenaline feeling without your adrenals and your whole, you know, all your glands kind of working. But I just think it's really interesting because that frantic behavior, that like, it's really interesting, you know, how people that are sort of um, hooked by things like pornography and gambling and binge eating or fast food, it's this very like desperate, degrading, repetitive behavior. And just because I can't help bringing in pharmacology, because I fucking love pharmacology, it's connected to dopamine and certain regions in the brain that like are highly wired with dopaminergic neurons, and those are the places that are the most like effective targets for like conditioning and mind control and like cult shit. Because if you can just get a person in that state where they're like you can rewire so much, because that dopamine high, if you will, people think that it's connected to feeling good, but it's actually not. Endorphins are connected to feeling good. Endorphins are what come at the end when you're like, oh, you know, whatever it is, that whether you accomplished something or you ate a big meal or you know, you're with a girl, whatever, right? Whatever it is, that feeling of like, whoa, like now I just feel good and I don't have to do anything. I've already got it. That's more in endorphins. Whereas the dopamine thing is like the craving, pursuing, grasping, like desperate kind of like, oh, I must have it. Like the incompleteness, the energy
It's the hunting,
of desire, yeah, of the hunt.
the
It's
hunt.
like you know, I must have it. I want it. And again, yeah, I just feel like that's there's just so much on the internet that exploits that. Even if you're like trying to do something simple, like, you know, I try to read about like food and health, and half the time I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, I'm better off just going to McDonald's and eating the most unhealthy thing I can fucking think of and just not thinking about it, not spending all day
Yeah.
reading about it. You know, and you know, obviously, I mean, I would say you know, the mainstream media and like the fear porn is like just a few millimeters or rungs above like actual porn, you know, which is like the bottom of the barrel. But it does it, especially the way that, you know, like, let's be real, the way that most, I don't know about women, I don't think women watch porn. I mean, I guess that whatever, I'm sure they do. I can't speak to that. But, you know, with men, like, because of how we are designed and how our design, how we relate to like having mates, and you know, like they do the experiments with the rats where it's like you introduce a new mate and it's like everyone's ready to go, you know, regardless of what state they're in before that. But like the same mate, it's like whatever, like you just, it levels off. And that's, they did this study with, you know, showing a participant like a certain video, but then as soon as you introduce like a new image and like a sexually charged image that is presenting the content in a new way, the person is like, you know, they get that surge, which is connected to like this explosive release of dopamine. I just wanted to talk about this because I think this plays in really well with like all this stuff with like all these disorders and psychology and pharma that's like, oh no, like, you know, nature really dealt you a bad hand. You know, you can't focus. It's like that has nothing to do with the fact that you have 112 tabs open of hardcore porn while you're trying to do your schoolwork. That's because, you know, mommy and daddy didn't hug you enough, you know, or whatever, you know, or you have bad genes, or you know, this and that, and we're gonna fix you. And it's like, don't worry about like natural law. Don't worry about any of that. Why would you take responsibility for anything, or think about how your behavior, which of course is, you know, enabled by like the fucked up system that people are born into. I'm not going to gloss over that. That your behavior is responsible for these things or these syndromes or these constellations of symptoms that you're experiencing. Like, no. This just happened to you. This is your fate. And so to bring it kind of full circle, you know, how is this any different from Christianity or the caste system in India? You know, it's like, this is your lot in life, you know, and right here we're going to present you with your very limited options for what you can do about it. And spoiler alert, they're mostly going to continue to enrich and elevate the same systems that came up with all this bullshit in the first place. So I don't know where I was going.
And yeah, and then it's you've got one of a handful of worldviews that are acceptable for you to see, quote unquote acceptable. You know, you can be in the Christian worldview, you can be in the Muslim worldview. You know, as long as you're in the globalization is good worldview,
Right.
that's really all that, you know, whatever it is. But that you've got these prescribed, essentially, belief paths that the system would prefer people to take.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, they're all belief paths. The problem is, in order to go along with this, you have to believe the overarching narrative, and you have to believe that there's no other choices outside of these 5 or 10 or whatever things that you have. And that's, you know, anything that can come in to show you the reality of a situation, and in this case, the reality being you have more than 5 options. You can see the world in a different way. That is a chance to make that, you know, give that person a chance to learn a little bit, and that's essentially where the drive to do that. That's where art comes from. And that's why it's important, because without that, how many missed opportunities might we have for pulling somebody out of a deeply ensconced worldview and belief system that they didn't really even choose or think about that hard for themselves. I mean, they went along with it, didn't think about it and went along with it. So chose to do nothing about it, or chose not to question it, chose not to, you know. But, you know, if there's a way you can get something in front of somebody that maybe unlocks the window, or the, you know, they can see through the keyhole into the world of truth beyond their box, that's the worldview. And I liked it, you know, they give them a chance to break out of it. And I'm really glad that you know, just happened across the image of the box, because as far as Robert Anton Wilson is framed it, you know, that's all your worldview is this box, and it's put in front of your face, and you can only see things that fit through that box, fit through that lens, that scope. You know, if you put binoculars on, you can only see very little. I know you might be able to see something far away better, but you can't see anything around you, because the light is hitting, that would be hitting your eyes, is now hitting a much smaller area. It has to do with lenses too, but point is, if it's outside of that framework, you don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
And that framework, that box, that's your belief. That's your belief system, your belief structure. And he would very frequently in his books call that belief structure by its shorthand name, BS. And art gives us a chance to recognize our own BS.
And that's why you should go get a BS in art. Or a BA, whatever. Right. Or yeah. Or
roll the outro.
I think it's so funny that it's like, yeah, I have a BS in science. It's like, this shit writes itself. Like, are you kidding me? That's why I never finished my BS in science. I was like, I've been BS in science since I was yay big. But to speak to your point, I was going to say, yeah, and that's also true on the collective level. And I feel like the image I wanted to sort of like put on that is, it's kind of, and this makes me think of what you were saying about natural law. It's all coming together. The fact that, like, it doesn't matter what reasons, it doesn't matter what circumstances conspired to put you on a certain path. It's like, you're on the path and you're continuing to do the thing. And so, yeah, I feel like art and psychedelics, man, this would be a great drinking game during this episode. Every time I say psychedelics, just like take a, yeah. With both of those things, it you know, you can frame it as, oh, it gives you back that blank slate, but nothing really gives you a blank slate. Let's be real. Other than, like, you know, and that's always the most valuable item in any video game, is the thing that allows you to unlearn all your skills, keep your skill points, and reassign them. That's like the most high value item, which I think says a lot about life.
Yeah.
And so what psychedelics and art, I think, really do is they allow you to just hit the brakes for just a moment and to take that momentum that you were on and sort of like almost like bottle it in a jar, but like stop moving and be like, whoa, hold on a minute. What am I doing? Do I want to continue in this direction? Who is the author of this story that I'm living out? You know, like does this align with anything that feels good to me or that you know resonates? Or am I just, you know, like, you know, you got plugged in into like a track, you know, and you're just like, you know, you're in like one of those mine shaft carts that's literally just like barreling down, and you've just never once thought about the fact that you have no control over where you're going and the momentum is just carrying you further. Oh man. So yeah, I think that's really important on the collective level, and I agree. I think that's why art is so important. And to bring in another concept from episode 1, you know, I think it's because it doesn't, in its not pure form, but in its best form, it doesn't play by the rules. You know, because with other, you know, like we live in a world of controlled opposition. You know, like you go to a protest and it's like, okay, great. You know, like you're going and, you know, yelling, and it's very farm animal-esque. It's very human farm, you know, and like you're, especially now, it's like, oh great, like, you know, the drone can get really good footage of you and like, you know, connect to your chip in your phone, and like, you know, now everything, you know, you're kind of, it's all out there, like what, you know, what you like to do and what type of citizen you are and what, you know, what you can be expected to stand up. It's like, whereas with art, like you said, it's so much more subtle in its best version, you know, and that subtlety is really the strength, because, you know, if you wanted to go in and you know, I don't know, infect a body with your brand of contagion, or if you wanted to go Trojan horse yourself into some part of society or the power structure and really shake things up, you know, really get in there and insert yourself and, you know, really create chaos and sort of like bring down at least part of the house of cards, you don't want to go into the lion's den like roaring and screaming and you know, leaving nothing up to the imagination, because they're going to be like, oh yeah, like he hanged himself real quick, you know what I mean? Like
Yep.
it just, you know, a noose hit the bottom of his jaw at 70 miles an hour. Like talk about tragic and
Yeah, what are you gonna do? It's just
unexplainable, you know, like
freak accident.
whoa, like there was a windstorm and a noose. You know the
A wet
story.
factory, you know.
Yeah, like there was a tornado and it was,
Swamp
you know,
gas. There's swamp gas.
Elon Musk he had just completed his new Gallows assembly line, and it was the perfect storm.
Automated. Will Smith tried to stop it.
Right. But yeah, so I think that's really the subtlety, you know, the subtlety. And that goes back to words. I just feel like language and words, I don't know, to me, like, what's more sacred than that? It's like all we fucking have left at this point. You know?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because the other three forms of language are being, I mean, words are too, but being constantly used to subvert people's critical thinking.
What would that be? Images and what else?
Form, shape, color, and language.
Form, shape, color.
And words or language or symbol.
How would one distinguish form from shape? Shapes
are distinctive shapes. Form
I see.
Just kind of form.
The form of something.
Yeah. The form communicates something about itself. The actual shape it's in, or really more its practical, tangible reality, maybe is a better. You know what?
I understand what you're saying.
Like?
So like a shape is like a shape can have an identity, like a square or triangle, whereas like a form could be the form of a particular person, or form versus emptiness.
Right? Sure. Yeah.
Having form.
Yeah.
Yeah. See,
I'm
we said an
sure
art
people,
thing.
sure people said Doug Martin's got a couple good presentations on the 4 basic languages. I can link people to. The other, okay, so the last thing that I kind of wanted to touch on that you made me think of here with all this one is with the whole, you talked about the kind of blank slate concept, and it might not be a totally blank slate, but that concept is important. So the idea is there's this concept with what is art trying to do? It's trying to get you back, like psychedelics, to a place where you can go back to that blank slate. And essentially, as we talked earlier about religion and how religion ties into this as well, the whole religious or spiritual enlightenment rebirth idea is talking about the same thing. The idea that you're going through a spiritual rebirth means you're doing what you're talking about in the video game. You have all your skill tokens, but now you get to choose where you put them. And where you had them before, how you stacked them as they came in, and you can think about those other choices that you've made. That's what's talked about. That's the symbolic rebirth in Christianity. That's the Enlightenment and Buddhism, to come to enough awareness to know that you have to change the belief structure of who you used to be without this piece of knowledge versus who you are now with this knowledge.
Can I say something
Yeah,
super
please.
fast?
Yeah.
That makes me think of what you said about Breaking Bad and how these characters exist to teach us about the logical or expected conclusion of a certain lifestyle or belief system or course of action. And it's like that, that moment of hitting the brakes. That's why art is such a gift, is it's like, you don't have to do this and crash and burn and screw up and get shot by meth dealers, because we're showing you what will happen if I didn't finish Breaking Bad. We're you're being shown. So in that sense, it's a gift, and I'm not sure people necessarily most of the time even understand that they're being given that gift. And I think they're confused because so much of what's called art now, not to let's give Christianity a break. I like using Cardi B as like the whipping boy for everything. That's I'm always down for that.
She's an easy target.
She really is in more ways than one. Yeah, I feel like when you have
I wasn't gonna say anything. I guess
when you have something like that's presented to you as art, like it's really easy to get confused about like what the meaning of art is, what constitutes art, like what kind of an emotional reaction, and to bring back in, because I mean what she does, like how the fuck is that any different from pornography? Like it is pornography. It's that same thing of like just assaulting someone's senses